I used to babysit at this rather large house the summer of my junior year of high school. The kids were about 4 years old and 2 years old. The first time I went, my sister came along to help. Walking into the house the first time gave me an uneasy feeling, but I never could quite put my finger on it. As the night went on, the parents were gone from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m., things started to get weird. My sister was sitting at their dining room table, and I had taken both of the kids to the bathroom. About a minute later she runs up to me and the kids and swears she heard footsteps run up behind her and suddenly stop. When she turned around she said she saw nothing and got super freaked out and ran to me. I'm gonna be honest, that freaked me out quite a bit. The rest of that night I still felt uneasy, but nothing happened to me. The next time I went to their house to babysit is when I experienced anything paranormal for the first time in my life. I was playing with the kids in their playroom, and from the opposite side of the room a toy fell out of the toy chest. Both kids were on my side of the room, and the toy chest was barely half full. I played it off though. I put the kids to bed and just waited for the parents to get home. The next couple of times babysitting after that second time were some of the most terrifying nights of my life. I would hear footsteps upstairs when I was downstairs and both of the kids were with me. I would see black shadows out of the corner of my eye quite often. It got to the point where the lights would turn off and on by themselves right in front of me. I could even hear the switch click. I completely lost it after the incident. I would cry and call my mom to help me get through it. It may not sound awful to you guys, but to me, the fear had consumed my whole body. The final straw was when the 4-year-old got out of bed and started laughing at me. I asked him why he was laughing, and he just continued to laugh and look to the side of my face and not directly at me. I had no desire to turn around and sent him back to bed. That was it for me. I knew something was in that house and I never went back again. The parents were my dad's friends from work, and so he heard many rumors about this house before. He heard that they went through 4 nannies in half a year. They paid very well, and that's why I kept going back. And the best part about this story is after I stopped babysitting, the 4-year-old had woken up one night screaming and crying, telling his dad he saw someone in his closet. And when I heard about that incident, I never regretted my decision to stay the hell away from that house. I had gone up to Chicago one spring night with a couple of my friends. We had taken the wrong road to a shopping center in the suburbs of Chicago. Because I was driving, I didn't notice the large cemetery on the right. One of my friends commented on how big it is. Then a few feet ahead, we noticed a young lady walking along the side of the road. She seemed to be lost. One of my friends suggested that we stop to help her. I did. She said that she was dumped there by her friend because they had gotten into an argument. She seemed to be nice. We told her to get in, and that we would take her to wherever she was going. We ended up bringing her to a high school, where she claimed there was a dance there. Although there didn't seem to be many cars in the parking lot. We just brushed it off as the dance had just started. The next day, I noticed the ribbon from her dress in my car. I had asked my friends if it was theirs. They all denied it. I went back up to the suburb of Chicago. It was a small town, so it didn't take me long to find the house that she had lived in. After I had rung the doorbell, an older lady had answered the door. I had asked her if she had a daughter named Mary. She replied yes, that she did, but that it has been 7 years ago that she had died in a bad car accident on her way to the school dance. That she is buried at the resection cemetery. I told her that my friends and I had given her a ride to the school dance yesterday. I showed her the ribbon. She started to cry while saying that that was a part of her beautiful dress, which she had made herself. She continued to say that I wasn't the first person to experience seeing her and giving her a ride. She said that Mary is known as Resection Mary because she is known to be sighted walking along the large resection cemetery. I don't remember the town that it was because it's been at least 7 years since I have been there. There are 2 paranormal experiences in my life that have left an indelible mark on me. When I was in the Navy, I worked in a top-secret area. It had 24-hour security guards at the door, and nobody who did not have top-secret security clearance could enter. The only people who had access were people I knew well, and none of them were into practical jokes, so there was no question of this being a trick. For several months on my morning watches, midnight to 8 a.m., I was working alone in a room quite a distance from the rest of the watch. The room was at the end of a long corridor, and there was nowhere anyone could possibly hide between the main area and this room. When I had been working there for a few nights, somebody asked me if anything odd had happened while I was there. I asked him what he meant, and he wouldn't say. He said he didn't want to put ideas into my head, but if it happened I would know. A few nights later, I was at work again, and I heard footsteps coming up the corridor. They weren't ghostly footsteps. It just sounded like regular Navy clodhoppers walking up the hall and into the room. I assumed it was somebody coming up to offer me coffee or a snack, and kept working with my back to the door. When nobody spoke, I turned around and nobody was there. I went back to work, and slowly a feeling of tremendous menace came over me. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination and to keep working, but it became more and more intense. I couldn't stay in that room. I went up to the radio room and told the others what had happened, expecting to be laughed at, but nobody laughed. Other people had had the same experience. I went back with some trepidation, and nothing more happened that night. But as long as I worked there, it happened every few days, sometimes only once a night, and sometimes 3 or 4 times. Nobody ever found out what it was, but nobody could stay in that room for more than a minute when it happened. The second experience happened when my father was dying. He was in a little cottage hospital in a country town. We were told the end was very near, and so my mother, my brother, and I stayed with him all the time. They told us there were only a few hours left. He held on for much longer than expected, and my mother, who was also terminally ill at the time, was exhausted. I persuaded her to come home with me to rest for a few hours, and she reluctantly agreed. She went to bed and got some much-needed sleep, and I lay reading while I waited for her to wake up again. I put down my book to give my eyes a rest, and saw my father standing at the foot of my bed smiling at me. He was no longer wasted and yellow with jaundice from the cancer that was killing him. He looked like a young man again, not a teenager, but perhaps in his early 30s, and brimming with health. I stared at him in shock for a few moments, and then closed my eyes and opened them again, and he was gone. Less than a minute later, the phone rang. It was my brother calling to tell us my father had just died. Were they really ghosts? I'll never know. I don't really believe in an afterlife, but after those experiences, I can never entirely write off the possibility. I was driving home through Nevada with 5 passengers in the car. We were in this massive canyon with huge walls and very little light. One of the other passengers was awake with me and witnessed this. That's how I know I wasn't sleeping at the wheel, or hallucinating. Since we were driving across the United States back into Canada, we probably drove over many ley lines where the dead transfer themselves into the afterlife. At around 2 a.m. during my shift, I saw the bottom half of a man's legs appear on the left side of the road and walk off the road and completely vanish. Almost as if it was a disembodied spirit who died there was walking off the road. I asked if my co-driver saw that, and she replied yes. Confirmed, my first time seeing a ghost. It was kind of like this, minus the top half of her body, and she was walking off to the left side of the road. I do believe in ghosts, so to me it appeared to be some kind of residual energy, probably from a victim who died there, and had energy that just creates that visual for people who drive past it over and over again for eternity. Residual spiritual energy locked into space and time forever for us to witness. My husband had a year-long training for his medical job in the military, so the kids and I were allowed to move so we could live with him. We thought we had really lucked out when I found a house for rent in a quaint little suburb of San Antonio, and the owner wanted to rent to a military family. It had 3 bedrooms, a huge office/playroom, a garage, a big storage shed with windows, and even an in-ground pool with pool service included in the rent, which was only $850 per month. We should have known it was too good to be true. It was great at first. We had frequent cookouts and entertained our new friends. The kids loved swimming, and it was nice to cool off from the record temperatures that had caused the massive drought. The kitchen was small, but the huge playroom had built-in shelves and a split door so I could shut the bottom and open the top half to keep my toddler contained but accessible, while I was busy in the living room or kitchen. And the house sat on a cul-de-sac less than a mile from the elementary school. We loved it. Then it started. We had been there, maybe a couple of months when we noticed the first sign something was off. Birds wouldn't fly over our yard. When they occasionally did, they got in gruesome mid-air fights that often resulted in a dead bird falling to our grass. It was like nothing we'd ever seen. The odd animal issues continued. Hundreds of tiny baby snakes poured from a crack under the toilet. No problem. We had it sealed. The mangled corpses of various small animals randomly appeared in our yard. No problem. One of the neighbors must have a cat. A cat gave birth under our storage shed. We couldn't see the kittens, but we could hear them. Until we didn't. We could only smell them. My husband's coworker gave us a kitten. I grew up raising and taming kittens. This one couldn't be tamed. I still have scars from it. We had to give it back. I think the animal event that upset me the most involved the nest a little bird had made on our towel stand by the pool. For many weeks we watched the mama bird sit on that nest. When she'd take a food break, I'd sneak our boys out to admire the nest, lifting them so they could look but warning them not to get too close and never to touch. Finally the eggs started to hatch. The next day the mama bird was gone, never to be seen again. When I peeked at the eggs, the baby birds were still inside, half-hatched, dead with the most horrible expressions as if they died in agony, their bodies twisted inside the shells. I didn't even think birds could have expressions, but I swear these did. Probably around the time the baby birds died, the noises started. There was an odd scraping noise from the attic. We brushed it off as squirrels or a tree, but it didn't seem right. Then the knocking started, steady, rhythmic knocks. It would go on for hours, but it took me forever to find the source. Sometimes, out of frustration, I'd scream for it to stop. And it would, immediately. The knocking was coming from behind a door in the garage. I didn't know what was behind the door because it was screwed shut with hinges on both sides that had been painted over heavily. I called the landlady to ask what was in that closet. I explained there were noises emanating from it. She said it was the water heater. I knew it wasn't. I reminded her the water heater was in a hall closet. She muttered some dismissive excuse and quickly hung up the phone. It made no sense. One day I crept toward the knocks. Just as I reached my hand towards the door, they stopped. My fingers were still about an inch away, so it wasn't that I'd pushed shut a loose door. And believe me, this door was not loose. I went back inside and they started again. I tiptoed back out, but again they stopped when I got close. This went on for a couple of hours. I even said hello one time and they stopped, but further questions did not elicit any response. I was baffled. Then the nightmares started. I was plagued by terrifying dreams. I was being stalked by a tall man in a tall hat. I never saw his face, but I heard his laughter. I also kept seeing images of these bizarre creatures in my dreams. The head of a dog or jackal with the body of a raccoon, but the tail of something else entirely. They had red eyes and I could find no reference to them online. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well at all. I also started getting sick a lot. My pain and fatigue were overwhelming. I spent much of my time in bed crying. I became very depressed. The scrapes, knocks, and nightmares persisted. Eventually I became determined to make it all stop. I searched online and in the phone books for a paranormal research team, or a psychic, or anyone who might help. I couldn't find much, and couldn't seem to get in touch with anyone. Out of sheer desperation, I called the local Catholic diocese. I'm not even Catholic, but figured they might know someone they could put me in touch with who would take me seriously. They did. They didn't even flinch at my story. They just said, "You need to call this guy. He's who handles our cases like these." They had a guy who specialized in this. Whoa. I called him and told him everything. I was afraid he thought I was nuts. I told him I believed whatever it was intended to kill me or destroy my marriage or both. He said he'd need to talk to my husband that evening. I thought to myself, yep, he must be planning to tell my husband I need psychiatric help. When my husband got off the phone with him that evening, we had an appointment for a team of men to come do a house blessing. The man had told my husband he'd had 5 other nearly identical calls that day after mine. He said we had an infestation. It was only later I learned that is what Catholics call a house possession. They showed up with holy water, Bibles, rosaries and scapulars like these. They prayed, burned incense and candles, read from their Bibles as they sprinkled holy water over seemingly every inch of the house and yard. It didn't help. We had to move. As my husband was packing up the last of our things alone because I had refused to go back to that house once I left, he met a neighbor from the adjacent street. Of course, he said nothing to her of the weird happenings that had driven us away, but she happened to mention something odd. She said they had been bothered by scraping sounds from their attic. When her husband went up to check it out, he saw a bunch of raccoon-like animals with glowing red eyes. She said it was enough to make them consider moving too. I don't know who lives there now or if the subsequent residents have had any similar problems. I've often wondered but never dared try to find out. I'm just glad to be rid of that house. I do know that the neighbors had told us we were the first family to rent there for longer than 6 months, and I do know someone else bought the house 2 years after we left. Oh, I almost left out the strangest part. Just before we moved, I became obsessed with getting into that closet in the garage. I stayed up literally all night fighting to free those hinges. When I had finally removed the last screw, I decided to take a break and gather myself before I revealed whatever was behind that door. I was exhausted, sore and drenched in sweat. It was morning, and I'd already gotten my oldest son off to school and my husband had taken the little one to daycare. I was almost ready. I wound up falling asleep in a chair in the garage. To this day, I can't understand or explain it, but I never opened that door. When I was younger, about 7 or 8, I would always go to bed before my parents. I would leave my door opened and turn my back to it while lying in bed. In the morning, my sheets and comforter were tucked under the mattress, holding me snug, and my bedroom door was closed. This went on for years, until I was 13 and we moved to a new house. I fell asleep that first night, and woke to find my bedroom door wide open and my sheets and comforter down at my waist. I figured my mother stopped tucking me in now that my bedroom was right next to hers. Or maybe it was because I was a teenager. I started closing my door when I went to bed at night, and didn't really think anything of it. A few weeks ago, my mom and I were talking about my daughter, who is now 10, and how I stopped tucking her in at night. I was wondering if that was too soon. I said something to my mom about how she didn't stop tucking me in until I was 13. She laughed and said, "Oh, I stopped way before that, you were about 6 or so." I asked if she was sure, and she said, "That's when you started closing your door at night." I remember the few times that I was half asleep, feeling my sheets being pulled up, my mattress lifting slightly and watching my mom close the door to my bedroom, but my mom swears that it wasn't her. My bedroom at the time was on the other side of the house, and she would go to bed about an hour after I did. My stepdad is handicapped, paralyzed on the left side, so I know it wasn't him. So, who tucked me in and who closed my door for the 6 years that we lived in that house? My friend's uncle passed away a few weeks ago. I went back to Brazil for his funeral since he was one of the helpers who introduced me to my grandmother's tribe. No, not a person from the tribe, but something like a tour guide. If it were not for him, I would never have met the same tribe my grandmother was from. For those who do not understand, my grandmother is from a native tribe in Brazil called the Tapere. They are very mysterious and not too open-minded, which means they rarely communicate with outsiders. So my friend's uncle was like a middle person who gave me a chance to make contact with those people. I do not think I became a friend to the tribe, but some of the elders still remembered my grandmother. During the funeral of my friend's uncle, in the air of sadness, I looked in the casket to say my final goodbye. I could not look into his face directly because I was afraid I would burst out crying. As I looked up and reached his face, I thought I saw a black veil on his face. I wondered if anyone would hide the dead man's face with a black veil. Normally not, right? I looked again from the corner of my eye but saw no veil. I whispered to my sister, "Vist ov you no seu rasto? Did you see the veil on his face?" My sister didn't. "Oh no, not again!" expression and shushed me, pointing her index finger to her lips. Yes, she had become very skeptical against paranormal stuff. I wonder if something happened. I heard stories and experiences like that usually at active spots with tragic stories. Did my friend's family uncle want to hide his face to prevent me from bursting into tears all over?